Section 4 of the American Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. The American Egypt by Channing Arnold and Frederick J. Tabor Frost. Section 4. Mexico City and the Mexicans. Part 2. Even to the casual observer, the difficulty of governing Mexico must seem inexpressibly great. President Diaz has succeeded not so much because he does not know what mercy means, or because a rifle bullet is his only answer for those who question his authority, but because he is endowed with superhuman tact. The iron heel, like that of Achilles, has its vulnerable spot, if pressed too hard upon a people's throat, and so he has little dodges by which he appears to his subjects to exercise a judicious clemency. If some redoubtable criminal is captured, some monarch of murderers, Diaz knows well that among his thousands of crime-loving fellow-countrymen the brute will have a large following. His execution will mean the declaration of a vendetta against the police, so he is put on his trial, condemned to death, and within 24 hours the President commutes his sentence to one of 20 years' incarceration in the penitentiary. After about a week there, he is taken out one evening, as usual, into the prison yard for exercise under a small guard of soldiers. One of these sidles up to him, and suggests that as the night is dark he might make a bolt for it. The convict believes it a genuine offer, sprints off, and is dropped at 30 yards like a rabbit by the 5 or 6 soldiers who have been waiting under the shadow of the further wall. The next morning the official newspaper states, "Last night the notorious criminal so and so, to whom His Excellency the President recently extended clemency, made an attempt to escape while being exercised in the prison yard, and was shot dead by the sentries." Thus everybody is pleased, except possibly the convict, and the President, without the least odium to himself, has rid the country of another blackguard. Another stroke of real genius was the way in which he has succeeded in setting thieves to catch thieves. When he became President, the country was infested with bandits who stopped at nothing. But Diaz erected huge gallows at the crossways all over Mexico, and the robbers found they had to stop at those, and stop quite a long while, till the zopilotes and vultures had picked their bones to the blameless white, to which good Porfirio Diaz desired the lives of all his subjects to attain. After some weeks of brisk hanging business, Diaz played his trump card. He proclaimed that all other bandits, known or unknown, who cared to surrender, would be enrolled as rurales (country police), and garbed in state uniform, and armed with Winchesters, would spend the remainder of their lives agreeably engaged in killing their recalcitrant comrades. This temptation to spend their declining days in bloodshed, to which no penalties were attached, was too much for many. Thus 50% of Mexico's robbers turn police, and murder the other 50, and acute Diaz has a body of men who, and whose sons, have proved, and sons' sons will prove, the eternal wisdom of this hybrid sphinx of a ruler. But there is a comic side to Mexican justice. There is a Gilbertian humour in the go-as-you-please style in which prisoners are treated. In one crowded court, when the jury had retired to consider their verdict, the prisoner was engaged in walking up and down, hands in pockets, cigarette in mouth, while the police, entirely oblivious to their charge, smoked and chatted in another part of the court. We asked one officer whether they were not afraid of the prisoner attempting to escape. "Oh, no," he said, "he'll wait for the verdict." Road making is practically always done by gangs of convicts, and, when they think they have had enough work, they throw down their spades and picks, and warders and everybody sit down on the roadside and enjoy a cigarette and a chat. The British minister told us that he had recently been shown over the penitentiary, in which at the moment there was a bloodthirsty rascal whose record of crime would have shamed a Jack the Ripper. The governor of the jail entered into a long and friendly conversation with him as to his wife and family, and, as the British minister humorously put it, "we were all but presented to him." The daily life of the Mexicans begins before dawn, when they all get up, apparently because it is a habit of which they cannot break themselves, for they seem to have nothing to do except to crouch round swaddled up in their blankets and complain that it is mucho frio. As soon as 6 o'clock and daylight come, they take their coffee and roll. Most Mexicans are heavy eaters, but they reserve their gastronomic heroisms for a later hour. Many, like the Arabs, have but one big meal a day, shortly after noon, when they do eat, so heavily indeed that the rest of their day is spent, boa constrictor fashion, sleeping off the gorge. Many others eat at 10:30 and 5 o'clock. The cooking is Spanish, only a little bit more so. Their favorite dishes are appalling stews, the greasy garlicyness of which would frighten away the appetite of an English schoolboy. One of the most popular is mole, the basis of which is said to be turkey, but it is very cleverly disguised. Of course, in the capital, foreign invasion has much modified the national fare, but the bulk of the Mexican people live to day, as they have for centuries past, on black beans (frijoles), tortillas, flat cakes of half-baked maize, first soaked and crushed, coffee without milk, red and green peppers, a little pork, and occasionally a piece of very stringy beef. The wealthy Mexicans never entertain in our sense, even among themselves. Such a thing as a dinner party is unheard of in non-official circles. This is probably due largely to their taste for secluding their womenfolk, though it is not unfair to say that it is contributed to by their disinclination for hospitality. The above remarks refer to the Mexicans, not to the Indians, who, as far as they can, live the lives their ancestors lived 4 centuries back, mingling but not mixing with their half–bred Spanish masters. The Mexican Indians are probably among the dirtiest people on God's earth, with possibly an exception in favour of the Yagans of Tierra del Fuego, the Eskimos, and 30 years ago in favour of the now extinct Tasmanians. But the average Mexican, too, has the Spanish horror of water, and though he will keep up appearances like a schoolboy who washes down to where his Eton collar comes, he will shirk more serious ablutions whenever possible. The profuse use of scents, especially among men, is always a suspicious sign, and this is not lacking in Mexico. The disregard of the people for bodily cleanliness is only matched by their contempt for those elaborate sanitary arrangements which in most European countries have done so much to make it possible for us miserable mortals to forget the humiliating physical necessities of our daily lives. Throughout the capital there are no public conveniences. An indigent apologist for Mexico declared to us on the steamer coming home that urinals did exist in the plaza near the cathedral. All we can say is that we did not see them. An English friend of ours, far from his hotel and in temporary distress, approached a passing Mexican señor with the question, "¿Dónde es el excusado?" To his dismay he was told that there was no such place, but he was courteously invited to the stranger's house, in the course of his visit passing through the sitting–room, where the wife and young daughters sat at needlework. All over the city are the drinking–shops (pulquerias), where the beloved pulque is served all day to a jostling, elbowing crowd of tight–trousered and bespurred vaqueros (cowboys), and of the Mexican–cum–Indian city riff–raff, who stand round the filthy counters. The floor is usually earth, and the corners of the shop are used by the customers to relieve themselves, without a murmur from the publican, or the slightest protest from any one. Nominally Mexico is a republic; really she is nothing of the sort. There is a Senate, a Chamber of Deputies, periodic elections of State representatives, a governor and council in each State of the Federation; but for upwards of a quarter of a century these have all been but pawns on a chess–board, the player a man of such astounding nature that those who laughed at Mrs. Alec Tweedy's description of him as "the greatest man of the 19th century" laughed from the fulness of their ignorance. Porfirio Diaz is an autocrat. He is an autocrat fiercer, more relentless, more absolute than the Czar of Russia, than any recent Czar has been, almost than Peter the Great himself. He is more: he is a born ruler. He has played for the regeneration of his country. He has played, but it is too much to say he has won. Nobody could win. But he has chained the bloody dogs of anarchy and murder, chained them successfully for so many years that there are some who forget that he has not killed them outright. Diaz is literally living over a volcano. He is a personified extinguisher of the fierce furnace of his country's turbulence. But when death removes him, what then? The deluge, surely, and after that one more apotheosis of the Monroe Doctrine, and the very wholesome, if somewhat aggressive, Stars and Stripes. You must go to Mexico and live among its people to know all this. It is singular how little the English people know of the country. Only the other day a veteran Anglo-Indian officer gravely asked us, "What is the exact position of Mexico in the United States of America?" We simply gasped. Words failed in such an emergency. Before Diaz came, Mexico's history was one of uninterrupted rapine, murder, and sudden death. Out of a morass of blood he has made a garden. Out of robbers he has made citizens. Out of bankruptcy he has made a revenue. Out of the bitterest civil strivings he has almost made a nation. He is nearly 80. He is as upright as a dart. He has the face of a sphinx, with a jaw which makes you shudder. He rarely talks, he still more rarely smiles, and yet the whole man expresses no false pride, no wind in the head. His icy, superhumanly self-controlled nature is too great to be moved by such petty things as pride and a vulgar joy in power. In manner and in life he is simplicity itself. He rides unattended in the Paseo. He comes down to the Jockey Club in the afternoon, and the members just rise and bow, and the president picks up his paper and sits quietly at the window reading. He dislikes all ostentation. His food is simple. His clothes are almost always a plain blue serge suit and dark tie. And in his winter home in the city he lives as a simple citizen. But his power is literally limitless. The Mexicans do not love him. Nobody could love such a man. The lower classes fear him unreasoningly. The upper classes fear him too, but it is blended with a lively sense of what he means to Mexico. But mark you, there is nothing of the bully about him. The bully is always weak, a coward. If Diaz was arrogant, he would be assassinated in 24 hours. He knows that. He knows the blood of the cattle he drives. Nobody but a madman whips a blood horse. But he must have an iron wrist and a good hold on the rein, and that is why one can safely describe Diaz as a born ruler. He instinctively understands his subjects. He has not learnt it, for he began 30 years ago. He was never educated in statecraft, for indeed he had no education at all. He was merely the son of an innkeeper, first sent to a Jesuit seminary, whence he ran away and joined the army. No, the man's secret is an iron will and positively miraculous tact. Whatever he does, whatever he orders, is always done so nicely. Everybody knows it has got to be done. Nobody ever crossed Diaz and lived to boast of doing so. But he gilds the pills he thinks his people must swallow, and they gulp them down and look up with meek smiles into that awful face. Here is a little characteristic story of him. Some while back there was an election of governor of Yucatan. The Yucatecan people have always been one of the most restive in the presidential team. They nominated a man disagreeable to Diaz. He nominated a second. The election ballot took place. The Yucatecan nominee was successful by an enormous majority. The news is wired to Mexico City. Back comes the presidential answer: "Glad to know my man elected. Am sending troops to formally inaugurate him." The troops came, and Diaz's man was formally installed. To the Chamber of Deputies no one can be elected against the President's wish. For the over popular governor of a State, Diaz provides distinguished employment elsewhere. Such a case occurred while we were in Yucatan. Señor Olegario Molina, of whom we shall later speak more, has been for some years deservedly popular in Mérida, for he has done much to improve it. President Diaz visited Mérida recently, and on his return appointed Señor Molina a cabinet minister. When he arrived in Vera Cruz, Molina found the presidential train awaiting him, and on reaching Mexico City the President and the whole cabinet had come to the station to greet him, and drove him triumphantly to the Iturbide Hotel. Charming courtesies! How favourably the presidential eyes beam on him! Yes, but he is banished, as much banished as the shivering pauper Jew workman turned away from the London docks. He was too powerful. He is safer in Mexico City, far away from the madding crowds, who would perchance have made him State Dictator. A too popular cabinet minister, again, is sent as minister to Madrid. Another is found essential to the pacification of a turbulent state in northern Mexico. And so the pretty game goes on, and there is literally no kicking among the presidential team. But there are fiercer exhibitions of autocracy at which people only hint, or of which they speak in whispers. There is no Siberia in Mexico, but there are the equivalents of banishment and disappearance for those who would challenge the authority of the Mexican Tsar. Even criticism is tyrannically repressed. There is a press, but the muzzling order has long been in force, and recalcitrant editors soon see the inside of the penitentiary. General Diaz's present (second) wife is a daughter of a prominent supporter of Lerdo de Tejada, who on the death of Juarez assumed the presidency, but was expelled in 1876 by Diaz. The alliance brought about an armed peace between the two men. But they tell this story. One day an argument arose, and hot words followed. It was at a meal, and when wine's in, wit's out. Diaz's father-in-law went far, and half in jest, half in earnest, said, "Why, Porfirio, you almost tempt me to turn rebel again." They all saw the President's face darken, but the storm blew over. That night it is said that Madame Diaz had to go on to her knees to her husband to beg for her father's life. Such is the arbiter and autocrat of Mexico. What, then, is the state of the country politically, and what will be her future? Mexico's great weakness (she has many, but this overtops all others, and lowers menacing on her political horizons) is that she is not a nation. There is no true national feeling, and a moment's thought will show that the circumstances of her population forbid the existence of such. On the one side you have the Spanish Mexicans, the white population, representing the purest European blood in the country. They are but some 19% of a population of 12 million odd. Among them, and among them alone, is patriotism in its highest sense to be expected or found. On the other side you have the vast mestizo class, the half-castes, some 43%, and then the purer Indians, forming the remaining 38%. Of these three classes the characteristics are sufficiently marked to destroy any hope of any wielding or holding together. The Spanish Mexicans are sensual and apathetic, avaricious and yet indolent, inheriting a full share of that Castilian pride and bigotry which has worked the colonial ruin of Spain. Brave, with many of those time-honoured traits of the proverbial Spanish Don, they are yet a people inexorably marked down by fate in the international remnant-basket. They have had their day. Ye gods, they have used it too, but it is gone. The mestizos, near half the population, have all the worst features of their Spanish and Indian parents. Turbulent, born criminals, treacherous, idle, dissolute, and cruel. They have the Spanish lust and the Indian natural cynicism, the Spanish luxury of temperament with the Indian improvidence. These are the true Mexicans. These are the unruled and unrulable hotchpotch whom Diaz's iron hand holds straining in the leash. The dogs of rapine, murder, and sudden death, whose cowardice is only matched by their vicious treachery. And last there are the Indians, heartless, hopeless, disinherited, enslaved, awaiting with sullen patience their deliverance from the hated yoke of their Spanish masters, not a whit less abhorrent to them because they have had 4 centuries in which to become accustomed to it. The heterogeneity of Mexico's population is only matched by the depth of antagonism of each class to each in all their most vital interests. To a common enemy Mexico can never present an undivided front. Indeed, it is not too much to say she can never have a common enemy. And whensoever the bolt comes, it will find Mexico unprepared, a land of ethnic shreds and patches, slattern in her policy, slattern in her defence, her vitals preyed upon by the vultures of civil strife. Of all lands she might best afford a realistic presentment of the sad tale of the Kilkenny cats. The potential wealth of Mexico is almost limitless, but the indolence of the Mexican nature is inimical to its development. Under the iron rule of Diaz the country has advanced, it is undeniable, in every direction. Railway enterprise has opened up unheard of possibilities in outlying states. Banking, though still crude (the bank rate is about 9%), is becoming a feature of Mexican commerce. Municipal life is assuming that beneficent tendency which it has for years possessed in most European countries. Drainage and sanitation are receiving official attention, and the welfare of the people is a plank, and a big one, in the present policy. Last but not least, the educational tonic in doses for an adult, perhaps too strong, is being given to a moribund people under the supervision of an excellent Minister of Public Instruction, Señor Justo Sierra. But bulk largely as this programme of progress does, it is due to one fact, and one alone, the supreme wisdom of the President in welcoming the foreigner and his capital. Behind all the great schemes of improvement one finds the foreigner. The excellent tram service of the metropolis was until recently practically owned by the late Mr. Alfred Bate and his firm. Railroads are English or American built and owned. New towns, such as Coatzacoalcos, are creations of such mechanical geniuses as Sir Wheaton Pearson. And this brings us to Mexico's second great danger, which must inevitably shape her future. She may be said to be largely in the hands of mortgagees. Of these the chief 3 are England, America, and Germany, and their mutual positions are pregnant with prophecy of what must come. The Germans have wrested from their rivals much of the trade, especially they have worsted the French retailers. But Germany has probably lent Mexico the last mark she will ever get. The English are chiefly centred on the mining interests, and sporadically in land and agriculture, and though the Mexican government would eagerly welcome large English loans, it is doubtful, very doubtful, if they will be forthcoming. But American capital is rolling in like an inexorable tide of fate. You have only to be in Mexico a day or two to realize how irresistibly the country is sinking into the power of the American investor, and how vain, and the more vicious because of their vanity, are the efforts of Mexicans to avoid looking upon the Gorgon head of Yankee hustle, which is destined to turn their somnolent national life, such as it is, into stone. If in Mexico City you say you are an American, you soon find you represent a race which is hated as much as it is dreaded. English, French, Germans are all welcome, but Americans! Mexico has more than a cloud on her horizon. She has Texas and Arizona to remind her perpetually of her fate. Never did spendthrift heir struggle more unavailingly in the hands of Jews than does Mexico in the hands of her great neighbor. Cassandra-like we will prophesy unto you. Let us not be rash and attempt to fix dates, but as certainly as day succeeds night, Mexico will eventually form a part of the United States. It will probably be sooner than is anticipated, even by the clearest headed men on both sides of the Texan frontier. With the death of General Diaz, Mexico will be plunged into Kilkenny strife. Nothing can save her. The North will go like a field of sun-dried barley, fired in a gale of wind. The turbulent North, where even now a life is worth nothing. Some Englishmen found a rich claim recently and sat down to work it. Presently warning came: "You had better clear. The Mexican miners are going to do you in." Well, the English went, and by a circuitous road, and it was a good thing for them that they did, for a gang of "civilised" Mexicans were waiting for them on the ordinary road, determined to knife them, not content with kicking them out of their claim. That's the North to day, and the fear of Diaz's name just keeps the pot from boiling over. But it's on the boil, right enough. Well then, the North will go into open rebellion, and the situation will be complicated by a rising of the Indians, who will be against everybody else. Mexico, in her present isolated independent condition, needs a soldier ruler. Your Corrals and Limantours, your Marischals and Sierras are good enough as cabinet ministers, but they are not the men for the awful task which Porfirio Diaz set himself 30 years back, and has brought to temporary perfection. Those who know Mexico best know there is no successor to Diaz. The very installation of a new president will only add fury to their internecine strife. But Mexico cannot boil her pot as she likes. Other nations have helped her with too many condiments and too much stock. American troops will cross the frontier to protect American interests and capital, and when they are once in they will stop there, as the English have in Egypt. It will be a protectorate, the maintenance of which will prove in the best interests of England, Germany, and every other power concerned. America is inevitably marked out as the Dea ex machina when the social earthquake in Mexico comes about. A few years, a few struggles, a bloody civil war, a rising of the miserable Indian slaves in all the States, and Mexico will vote herself inside the federation of which, despite her struggles, she is already so completely a geographical part. The Mexicans have a little weakness for calling their land South America. Whatever else Mexico is, she is not South America, and their eagerness to alter stern geographical fact only underlines the fear which is in their hearts. When one remembers that by the Nicaraguan treaty 5 miles each side of the canal are definitely annexed by the United States, when one looks at the ridiculously truncated appearance of the land of the stars and stripes on the map of the world, when one knows enough of the Mexicans to foresee what must happen on Diaz's death, when one tots up the vast amount of American wealth which is at stake in Mexico, when one remembers that Mexico is without military or naval resources to resist foreign interference, her army of 20,000 is, as a fighting force, a negligible quantity, and her navy consists of 3 old gunboats and a training ship. When one realizes that her difficulties will find her with an empty treasure chest, living from hand to mouth on a suicidal policy of a crushing excise system, stifling internal commerce and forcing her people to look to other lands for countless manufactures which they could tackle themselves, when one sees that the last, the greatest resource of every country, an appeal to national feeling, will be lost on ears deaf with the din of civil bloodshed, it does not need much acumen to drive at the conclusion that Mexico as a separate state is doomed to extinction, and that the stars and stripes will float all over America to the Panama Canal. Yucatan, which wished to cede herself with Texas in 1845, Guatemala, Nicaragua, they must all go, and into the atrophying veins of these dying Latin races will be injected the honest virile life of a democracy triumphant, and Mexico, for certain, will rise phoenix-like from the ashes of her hybrid Spanish past. End of Section 4.